Ready, Kim? All set? All right, I'd like to call the regular meeting of the Village Planning Commission of Almont for August 3rd, 2023 to order, please. May I have a roll call?
Adieski,
Here?
Meek,
Here.
Zender,
Here.
Schneider, Dyke.
Before we approve the agenda, I've been asked by our village manager, David Trent, to add one item, if we could, please, under new business, and it'd be for discussion purposes. Would be number 5, and he's asked us to put on Burley Park site improvements. So could we add that to the agenda? And if we could, then I would ask for an approval of the agenda as is presented with the new item.
So,
I have a
Support.
motion and I have a second. All those in favor?
aye.
All those opposed? Motion carried. Next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes of the regular meeting of July 6th, 2023. They've been included in your packet. And there are one question I have, and I would ask Steve and Tim, if you've had a chance to read the minutes, is the language in those minutes the way that we proposed it at our last meeting before we approved them? Now, I just want to make sure we're correct because Kim did a lot of writing for us, and I just want to make sure that we got it right. Does it appear that that's what you said and that's what you wanted?
At the last meeting.
At the last
There
meeting,
has been
yes.
some fixing up since that time at the council level, but that's, I believe that accurately reflects.
Tim, and it does for you too? All right, then I would ask, unless there are any other questions besides the one I had, I'd ask for an approval of the minutes.
So moved.
I have a motion and I have a second. Any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carried. Next item on the agenda is public comments. The two guests we have, I'm assuming we will talk to you a little later in the agenda or this evening. So we'll move on after public comments. And the next item is a public hearing for zoning ordinance amendment 193.8 food truck use. Steve approached or suggested to me, first of all, let me announce the public hearing is open. And so we can discuss this particular item. And Steve has some additional input he'd like the other members to hear in relation to this before we move on the item. So Steve, I will let you discuss the item.
Taking a somewhat different stand than I did at our last meeting. I've had a lot of blowback or commentary from the public regarding the food truck issue, which essentially is that there tends to be a very favorable reaction from the community. And I brought it up at our council meeting past Tuesday, and it was mostly, actually, essentially entirely from all council members, a positive response to the general topic of food trucks, that in essence, it provides a chance for additional community involvement. It actually brings people into the community and from outside of Almont, and they tend to be quite popular. So there's a general positive response to the food trucks, which is quite contrary to the position that I was taking in the last meeting, that we should lean heavily towards protecting our brick and mortar restaurants. And it was told, which was verified, that the food truck that was parking on Main Street had been brought in by Chicky. So that's interesting because that's a brick and mortar. And she was doing that because she can't serve food. She doesn't have a kitchen. So that was an interesting factor. And then all the other reaction from the community, generally favorable towards food trucks, like, can we go just a little bit slower? And I certainly don't want to steal Tim's thunder. Can't really do that. But Tim did point out at our council meeting, yeah, but that food truck is taking up 4 spaces on Main Street with propane tanks, and that's not safe, and we need to be doing at least some regulating. And so what I'm suggesting is I think we should implement something with regard to this ordinance in terms of regulating that particular situation, but kind of put the brakes on as far as the rest of the ordinance that we've proposed, because the way my interpretation, just in my humble opinion, the ordinance that we set up, I think will kill the food truck business in the community. I don't see it happening. You know, site plans and permits, and it's like, I just don't, I think it would create an environment where we won't have any. And I'm no longer convinced that that is wise. So I'm suggesting we go a little bit slower. I'm not sure exactly what kind of language we should be using as to that particular situation with the food truck that was parking on Main Street, and whether it applied just to that situation or broader language. But I think we need to revisit and slow down just a bit. So that's my input.
Tim, comment?
I don't mind rolling back the regulations a little bit, but I still think it needs to be regulated. I think these 3 bullet points need to be addressed within the ordinance. It was discussed at council that, and as Steve said, that the current format will kill food trucks because they're going to be here regularly. But we still need some regulation. So my proposal, at least at a minimum, they should have to register with the village. So that way we have their information on file if something does occur. It's up to village or planning commission if a registration fee is applied. Both Garden City and the township of Delta Charter Township utilized my research person got this, did a bunch of reading on a bunch of ordinances over the last couple of days. They should not be allowed to be in the right of way on Main Street or on St. Clair, especially in the parking areas where we allow parking for the people on the west side now. They should not be allowed to be within 200 feet of a brick and mortar restaurant. And those are the three main items I think should be included within the ordinance.
Gary, you have an opinion?
I would.
I'm sorry.
Go right ahead.
And we have friends outside of Almont whose neighborhoods have like a food truck party. So that would be like in the private residential area. So if those occur, we should have some kind of stipulation in there, both allowing and regulating that. To what extent that would be for us up for discussion.
Gary?
I wasn't against the food truck in principle. I mean, seeing a group of community members out there, that's an enjoyable situation. We have to have some type of regulation out, because anyone driving through town that owns a food truck and they see one very successful, we have to have something to at least get a handle on it. So we don't have a whole line of food trucks up and down. We have got to be able to govern it up to a point. Having them is fine, but we're going to have to restrict them in one way or another.
I think this is just my opinion, but if you look at the village proper itself, one of the problems we have is location. Where pray tell, where could we stage them? Because you might start with one, and like you say, we could attract 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then where do you put them?
Now we have
Where do you put them?
Well, it was brought up at council, and I think we've had discussions on it before. Two primaries you could do that I think would meet the 200 setback requirement would be the parking area behind the theater, along the theater area of the east side of town, and it's still visible. Or, except for during service time, we have that working agreement with the First Con now, and that parking lot would be another that's right off of Main Street. It's got ample parking for the food truck to park and for people to come and eat, just like they did with the Jeep and the older car shows this week. So, I think those would be two prime examples, but I think we would have to designate those areas within the village.
Yeah.
And really emphasize that the right of way on M53 is a no-no zone, both for safety and for the discrepancy of our businesses.
I agree with that.
You agree? Yep.
Yeah. Food trucks are fine, but we have to have a place for them. And we have to know who they are, what they're selling, and we have to have some type of regulation for it. Again, like you're saying, you can't just let it run rampant. And 53 is not a good spot.
I see our counselor over there is grinning from ear to ear, so I will let her comment as well while we're talking.
Sure.
Go right ahead.
So we could go through a few different changes that I think may answer some of those different concerns for us to ponder. So the first thing is a special land use requires more money to operate because we're sending out all these notices. So if you did downgrade that to a permitted use, that is one easy way to make the fee less expensive, both for the village as well as for the applicant. So that's one thing we could consider doing, is have that consider it still be a site plan review as a temporary use, but not have it be a special land use.
Would there be then,
But
oh, go ahead, Tim.
I'm sorry, village council, they're like, if you make food truck drivers come in here to do a site plan, there will be no food trucks.
Oh, so the clarification would be is that to make it easier for applicants, one thing that we can easily do, because we do have the data now, is that when I say a site plan, I mean more of a plot plan. I mean an aerial that tells me I'm parking my food truck 10 feet from this, 10
Okay.
feet from that. And so it doesn't need to be done by Duttler or any like surveyor or engineering. I just need to know that you're meeting the setbacks. How many parking spaces are you going to take over? What are your hours of operation? And they can draw that out on an aerial. That is sufficient for what we need. And that's just something that we can either bake that into the regulations to clarify that, or we can help clarify that through a food truck application. But part of it too is that we currently crafted the language for these are ones that are not associated with some type of event. So this isn't music in the park related food trucks. These are otherwise operators.
With council.
Yes.
And councils, and we still think that the village run or types of events should have that waiver. But council thought even food trucks just selling privately, these regulations are way too stiff to allow any kind of food truck business within the village.
Sure.
And that was the majority of council. I mean, a couple of us, me specifically, specified we needed regulation. And I still agree, but I think the bullet points I laid out tonight would appease it getting through council.
So one of the other things we could consider is clarification on who the applicant is. So if we're talking about DDA parking lots, the applicant could be the DDA. And they say, this is where we allow a food truck, and we have these many operators that use that license. That's what we've done in the city of Lapeer with their Walmart one. So the Walmart has the zoning permit for a food truck to operate, but it's not stuck to one operator. And so that's one way. If we're talking about spaces specifically in the downtown, those are the property owners. That's something they're doing. I think you can also make an argument, though, farther where the bank property is north of us. I think it's the bank name eludes me.
PNC.
Yeah, PNC now.
It
Or no,
was.
farther north.
Tri-County Bank.
Tri-County Bank,
Oh,
that's
oh,
right. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So they have a vacant parking lot, and I know different grocery stores to drum up business or whatnot, they put food trucks there. They have a lot of open parking when it's not a Sunday, things of that nature. And so I guess it depends how you want to do that buffer, if you still want to do some type of buffer from existing operators. But that's something that's another location that you can see it from the road, and is amped room that would easily accommodate that. So those are two different logistical components that can sometimes help us when we're thinking of the application of this regulation, is we could have the DDA say, these are the 2 spots within our village parking lot areas, we would be comfortable. I'm not sure the park behind the theater that you were mentioning, if that's village owned or it's not. Okay. So that's
if
something we could
somebody had a
consider.
food truck and wanted to fill out an application, the things that Tim brought up, would those be spelled out in that application at the time that they're filling that out so they know what the criteria is?
Yes.
So we could include those in the application process.
Right.
Now, would they file that application with the DDA or with the village?
So I would say that we'd want to process the site plan review is still done through the village at the planning commission level. However, one thing I would want to check with the DDA on is that, do they want to handle applications for managing the food trucks that are there? Almost like managing the businesses that are within your DDA. And they could say to rent out the food truck space that we have acquired, it's $50 a month or something like that. Or depending on if you have 3 different food trucks, that's the food truck that's there Monday, Tuesday, Thursday. And then there's another food truck Wednesday, Friday, or whatever the case is. But that would be something the DDA would have to make a decision as the applicant and property owner if they want to manage it that way. But that would not be something us as the village would want to manage, because it's the DDA as the property owner.
Just for clarification, so 12 parking spots behind the medical building are DDA and everything to the north of that. But right behind the theater building and that parking lot, that's privately owned.
Okay.
At this point in, well, I'm sure it'll remain so. So that's not DDA.
Right. And so that would be something that property owner would have to choose. Do I
Mhm.
want to go for this permit
Yeah.
to specifically allow like a rotating food truck space? That's kind of how that's how I would categorize it, and just make it really clear. This is what we're being proposed. Same thing with Vickers, if they wanted to do a rotating food truck space that they rent out.
Normally the parking spaces behind the theater building almost always entirely empty during the daytime.
Sure.
So, well, would we, is it assumed going to be part of the process that the food trucks have to have Department of Health?
Correct. I thought
permits?
that was one of the stipulations in
yeah.
the current requirements is they had to
Yeah.
have all
Okay.
required
Yeah.
Lapeer County Health Department
And-
requirements
and
for
permits,
food
yeah.
safety.
They have to
Yeah.
have the health department
Yeah.
clearance and
Yeah.
they would, that's why those things would be, I'm assuming would be listed as part of the application process if somebody wants to do that. Here's what you need. If you still want to follow through, then here are the things that you have to follow, which would be what Tim is indicating, the criteria that we're looking at. And if we're fortunate enough to identify an area in the village, that makes the whole process, even simpler, because we now have an area that food trucks can park. Right now, we don't have that, but, so, Tim, does that seem to meet what you're talking about in the permitting process, if we include those criteria?
Yeah, as long as the 3 criteria that I specified at the beginning are within those regulations.
Now, would the permitting process be in lieu of the special land use or in addition to?
So it depends how you want to structure it. So if you downgrade the special land use to a site plan review, that would be the permit.
Okay.
And so that would live until it no longer operate, or they essentially don't operate anymore, because it's not a special land use. We don't revoke it. And so we'd have to go through the process of abandonment, essentially. But typically, if you're talking about an annual verification, now when it's one food truck operator, and they're the applicant, it's easier to go through that process. However, if we're deferring that to the DDA is now having a collection of vendors, the list of who is able to use that spaces and when really more falls on the DDA in that scenario. Or whoever's the applicant is really who that falls onto. We can still require an annual review specifically of components of that site plan. So It's not uncommon that a lot of communities will have their fire department inspect food trucks when they're operating just to ensure, because of explosive components, that if it all goes wrong, they at least know the different components and things of that nature. But that's something that's usually more consistent with a separate police power that says, I'm a food truck registered. That's a different process typically, different than zoning. So I had kind of encouraged not to do the separate police power because, one, it's another license that you separately have to track. And that typically results in more of a deterrent from a fee schedule standpoint for operators.
So we would keep the special land use then for the definition of where they're, what site they're going to be using. Is that correct?
So you could keep it, or you could downgrade it to just be a site plan.
Okay, all right. Is there a preference? Which would be better for the village? One way or the other? I stumped everybody.
Least restrictive.
Pardon?
Least restrictive.
Least restrictive, okay. So if we downgraded it, then that makes it least restrictive, correct?
That's right.
It does.
So I'd have to check one other section, so I don't know how pressing we want to move forward with this. I'd have to do a few checks of a few different sections in the zoning ordinance. The other thought you could do is you could change it to be a zoning permit. Now, I cautiously suggest that idea, primarily because it is a temporary use. Now, we pulled it out from the others, so we can treat it differently because it's a different use. It's a food truck. You could consider doing it as a zoning permit, but that means then this body doesn't do it and it's clearly administrative. That is the least oversight. I have a few different concerns with that approach, but that is an option. I think generally speaking, you'd want to see it at some level of public body because it is going to change the flow of that site when it is operating.
So if we establish a place that the village owns, a vacant piece of property, then the application would be filed with David?
Yes.
It would be. Then he would have to ensure that they have followed all the criteria before he approves their permit. Is that correct?
Right, but when you say village property, we're not talking DDA?
No.
Okay,
No,
just
see,
checking.
that's why I'm
Just
being
checking.
specific.
All right, yep.
DDA has their,
Their own-
they had to do their
That's
own
right.
thing. I'm saying if the site we ended up having is a
Like if we
village-
decide to do it over there,
Yeah, or
behind,
parked here in the parking lot.
Yep.
Village owned.
Right.
Then the application comes to David.
that's right.
Okay.
Now, what if they want to put on private property?
Same process. Whoever is the property owner is our applicant in that scenario, and they're the ones that would be, if they chose to do that vendor model. In Lapeer specifically, we did have one vendor that lives also in Lapeer and lived off 24, and he wanted to do it out of his house, or like out of his driveway. So that was no go because that is a residentially zoned property and that's a commercial use. It wouldn't be zoned correctly if they were to consider it out of their home.
Current food truck that we're talking about, be almost like a caterer of Chickies. So would all this, that they're bringing them in, I didn't realize that Chickie was bringing them in. Would they be exempt from that because Chickies have brought them in?
Mm.
Or that they would fall under the food truck category, no matter
Correct.
if somebody's brought them in as a part of their business?
That's right.
Okay.
Because it's a use argument. So you are not just having it in the parking lot because you take it on the weekend to other places. You're doing a retail transaction out of this food truck, this temporary structure, in which you're then causing a different use.
Any other comments relative to the public hearing? Everybody's got their 2 cents in?
Well, I have an administrative question. We have a public hearing scheduled for August 15th at the village council for this exact same thing. Do we cancel that?
Yeah,
So it depends how comfortable you feel as a planning commission. So if you want to see, I guess, another rendition where I add in the plot plan, we change it from special land use to permitted use.
back next month when we can look at it fully and not try and rush stuff through. I don't think trying to rush it through that would be a problem.
I don't have a problem with that.
Okay.
We're not in that big a hurry, Caitlin.
All right, so I will bring it back.
Okay.
But as part of the public hearing, just to make it clear, procedurally, because we did hold the public hearing on the food truck, that does not mean that we need to hold another public hearing at the planning commission. We can make changes at this meeting and not recommend action, and we still have fulfilled our open meeting act and planning, zoning, enabling act obligation, holding a public hearing
So
on
we
this
could bring the
topic.
topic back next month.
That's
and
right.
talk about it.
And then you could move
And
it
then
forward.
craft whatever we want to do at that time.
That's right.
Or
And
give you
then-
some ideas of what to do,
Right, and then it could go forward to go back to the council.
because it would be new. It would be different than this one.
Amended, it would be amended.
Okay,
It would be amended.
okay.
And you'll be able to handle that administratively, canceling the public hearing?
Yes.
You have to give notice, right? That it's not going to
Yes.
be a public hearing.
So this public hearing then is sufficient to discuss this topic from this point forward.
That's right.
Okay.
And making sure that we do open it up to the public for their comment too.
Yes.
We haven't done that yet.
Either of you gentlemen have any comments relative to food trucks? Good.
Great.
There's a lot of good examples of how food trucks are very positive for the community. I just read the other day that Home Depot is bringing back their hot dogs, and that's been long awaited. And I even found out West Oregon where they have entire parking lots full of food trucks, and people absolutely love it. So it depends on what your vision is. If you want people to come in, I don't necessarily see food trucks as a threat to brick and mortar. I think it potentially draw in more people for the brick and mortar places, because you'll get a little new life here and say, okay, that's what I want. I got a lot of stuff going on. And I'll see people shops.
Very good. Thank you. Towards the public hearing. Are you smiling? You got anything else?
Nope.
Nope.
All good.
Right, Kim, I'll close the public hearing. Moving on, new business, Planning Commission application review. We have two candidates who have expressed an interest in joining our motley crew here. And so I would be, the first one is Robert Miller. Robert, I would like to give you a few minutes to say your piece and give us a little background about yourself.
Good evening, and thank you for this opportunity. We were speaking earlier, 2 of our 4 children live in Elmont. We were in Florida for many years, but we spent a lot of time here visiting them. And my wife and I both liked what we saw with the community. We decided that when we moved back, because I'm in the process of retiring, that we wanted to settle in Elmont, which we have. So we bought here a few years ago, and I've been watching, the government, what's been going on between the Planning Commission, the council, the ZBA, from the comfort of my couch, for the most part. But I felt that I needed to have a better view and get a better feel for everything by personally attending, which is what I've tried to do over the last few months, as some of you may have seen me. My background is I'm a 3rd-generation builder, licensed in the state of Florida and also in Michigan. I have developed and built commercial and residential and multiple buildings over the years, most of them in Macomb County, but some also in St. Clair. I think that now that I have the time with trying to retire, I would like to give back possibly to the community in some way. And I like this community. I like where it's going. I just have been very happy, and we are very happy here, and I would like to see that. I'm a progressive type person. I think that, getting back to the food truck issue, if I may, I like all of the comments and everything. I like where it's heading, less restrictive, but some restrictions. And I like where everything has been heading in the village here, and hopefully I can contribute in some way.
Do any members have any questions?
So are you active at all now in terms of building construction?
Yes.
Still, okay.
Yes,
You
I still have
some of
jobs
that-
in Florida that we're trying to finish up. I just came back in Tuesday just in time to be able to attend the council meeting Tuesday night. Was down there for 5 days. I'll probably have to go back in another month. Every month or two, I have to go down for a few days. I'm trying not to work in Michigan, but yet I am licensed here as a residential builder. So I can, I may do a few things just to stay busy.
As you observed the council meetings and our planning commission and the ZBA, what did you learn, or what's your opinion of, the group as a whole?
I think that everybody on all three have the best interests of the village at heart. And that's why, you all are here, why I want to be here or part of it. And I got that from all three, from the ZBA to planning to the council, that everyone, wants for the betterment of the community.
Reaction to the application from Bob. I've seen him attending meetings and that's interesting. He's showing up and he's showing up and he's showing up. But the most exemplary example of that, before Tim ran for council, he attended every single council meeting for a year because he wanted to know what was going on and wanted to get a handle on it. So Bob has been doing that. And I also consider his experience as a builder, construction, development, all of that would be make him a very valuable member of the planning commission. That's part of what we're doing is planning what's going to be happening in the community, and also well-spoken, articulate. So I'm really happy to see this application.
Any other members have any comments?
So you are now a permanent member of in Elmont.
Oh, yes.
Going back and forth to Florida, will that interrupt like our meetings and things?
No, I made it a point to make sure that I came back in time for Tuesday's council meeting. I could have very easily stayed the rest of the week, but I wanted to be here for the meeting, rather than, very easily, I could have gone online and watched the meeting, from down there, but I wanted to be here, for it. Plus this evening, to be here. My time that I have to go back to Florida is lessening every month, because I'm finishing the jobs up. And we're not doing any more, I'm not taking on any more projects down there. So, but no, vehicles are registered in Michigan, everything. We have been permanent residents now.
Some reference in your application as far as being involved with various communities. Were any of those involvements in government?
I was mostly a volunteer behind the scenes, rather than sitting on any boards. I was very involved down in Almirada, in the Florida Keys, for many years down there. Also in East Detroit, where I grew up, involved with a lot of the Lions Club and the Kiwanis and everything. I wasn't a member, but yet I always volunteered, and I tried to give it back to the community.
Any other questions from any members? All right. Thank you, Mr. Miller. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Mhm. Our next candidate, Mr. Carl, would you care to give us a few minutes of your time and explain why you want to be on this illustrious board?
Well, I gotta say, that's a tough act to follow. I don't have the experience or he's got a lot over me. But I saw the position available, and so a quick background: me and my wife moved here roughly 3 years ago. I graduated from Oakland University with an engineering degree, and I work in the automotive field in Auburn Hills. And so we lived in Romeo for a little while, and then we found a place here, and it's over in the Kaylin sub. Love the town. I grew up in a small town, and so this is like really homey for me. And this is, I just like really want to be involved in the community a bit more than what I have been. Me and my wife both attend Romeo Church, so we're involved in a lot of community outreach programs there. Obviously, we're not facilitating all of them, but we're involved, and so they're very close communities, I feel like. And we go there, we talk about Elmont. Everybody knows everybody from Elmont as well, so that kind of inspired me to like want to be more involved here, because we bought a house hoping to be here for a long time. So we, sorry, I'm nervous a little bit. I haven't done public speaking in a while, so.
Doing fine.
Don't worry about it.
Not since school, and I've been working at my job. I don't have to do this. So, but yeah, anyway, so we moved here, we loved it. And there were some changes with residential building, and we were like, man, it's kind of crazy. And I was just like, I would love to know more about what's going on in the community and be more involved in that. And even just this food truck thing has been kind of inspiring, because it's like I have a little bit of experience with just community, and even at the church we serve at. My wife, she sets up some of the food trucks there, and so she's got some experience with dealing with these food trucks and things like that. And so it was kind of inspiring to me to just hear about even the smaller details that what's going on in the community. Background, like I said, I'm an engineer. My wife and I also are professional photographers, so we do weddings, and she does a lot of like senior photo shoots and all that kind of stuff. So that's.
She's not the photographer moving into 145 South Main, is she? Okay.
Any questions from any of the members?
First thing I'll do is next time you interview for a civic position in public, don't wear flip-flops.
Yes, I was going to comment
That's
on
what-
that. I was told it was casual, but I wasn't sure how casual. And I got home from work and I was really hot, and I'm like, shoot, I'm away here. I'm like, I should have
That's your
dressed
advice
up a
for
little
me.
better.
I'm a fellow Oakland graduate, so you have a positive there.
I apologize. I will dress better than this. I have better.
Give me 2 examples, since you've been in Elmont, give me 2 examples of positives that you see and 2 examples of things that you see that could probably be improved.
So in Elmont, I love the small town feel. That's a huge positive for me. I think that is worth preserving, because I think, you go to places like Rochester and Troy and all that stuff, and it's great, right? But it's great to visit. I don't go down. I wouldn't want to live down there. We come up here, and like I said, we moved in and they built a ton more houses, and now it was a beautiful area. I'm like, darn it. Like now I feel like I'm starting to get to Rochester, and I don't want to go back there. I wanted to move away from there. So I love the small town feel. And it's very familiar for me. I grew up in the middle of the state, a small town called Lakeview. Probably even smaller than this town, to be honest. So that's a huge positive for me. The other positive is I love the businesses and things here. Roots is like one of our favorite restaurants. We go downtown all the time. You might be able to see us biking. We've got a ton of lights and stuff on our bikes, but we always take the loop and we hear the music in the park and stuff, and it's fantastic, and we like it that way. So I guess that will bring me to the other point, the things that could improve on. Me and my wife, we always ride by that old theater, and we're like, man, some of these places could definitely be just shaped up on Main Street a little bit. We always thought it'd be really cool if somebody bought that and turned it into, I don't know, like either made it a theater again or did something with it to further bring activity here, and that way it doesn't look like it's run down as much. But obviously I know it takes money and time and investment and stuff. So
It's happening.
is it?
Yeah, it's in process. No.
Awesome. I'm so happy. Yeah, because we've walked by there and I've kind of poked my head in the window. I'm like, it doesn't look like anything's going on, but I'm so happy to hear that because that is a cool place and it's right there on Main Street. It's such a prime location. So,
Famous law offices right there. Yeah, so if
Yeah.
you get in trouble, that's what.
I really can't say that there is one. I mean, we've lived here and we haven't had any issues with, I mean, really anything. I guess my only other negative would be seeing more houses be built in our backyard. And so it's kind of, you move away and you're like, oh, darn. But I know it was in the plan for a long time. So I can't argue against that.
It's fine.
Yeah, I like the idea of getting a younger perspective on the commission. I do. But one of the reasons why you see us all these old guys here is we don't have as many strings pulling us in a constant direction, and availability is the primary. We need your ears. I mean, I don't know what all is that something you're going to be able to do? You feel committed to that?
Yep. So I do have just a normal day job, 5 to 9. And, like I said, we are involved in church and whatnot, but my schedule is very flexible. So according to whatever times that I need to meet, I'm able to move my schedule around. And me and my wife kind of do the same thing. So if there is something of demand, she can usually do it rather than me or vice versa. So, yeah, we're very flexible, I'll say.
Thank you, Nathan. Appreciate it very much.
Apologize for the flip-flops.
Do we need to do something as far as council is concerned?
If you would like to make recommendations,
Ask the committee members, is that something we want to do this evening? And make a recommendation?
We have to do two separate, right?
I think we should do them separate,
I'll make
yes.
the recommendation that we appoint Robert C. Miller to the planning commission.
Is there a second? I have a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carried.
I'll make the recommendation that we appoint Nathaniel S. Carl to the planning commission. I agree with Gary here that we need some young blood.
Have a second?
Support.
I have a support. Any other
Oh.
discussion?
I'm sorry,
All those in-
I take it back, sorry. I have to abstain.
You have to
'Cause
abstain?
Yeah, because I do the
All right, give me another.
appointing.
You have a
Sorry about
second. All
that.
right, I have, Glenn is the second.
Sorry.
Any other discussion? All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Motion carried.
Abstain.
So Kim, explain to them about the two of them, what will happen next.
okay, so on August
Please.
15th, it'll come before President Schneider and Village Council. I would recommend that you attend in case council has questions for you. No flip-flops. And
You're not going to live that one down.
Right. And then after the discussion, Mr. Schneider will make the decision to appoint and then ask for council's ratification.
Thank you very much.
Presuming that
If that's done, then you would be on board for the September meeting, correct?
Correct.
presuming that it goes well, then you could be sworn in at the next planning commission meeting. Or would you swear him into council?
Either or.
Yeah.
They explain your salary.
Something about healthcare.
And it doubles every year, so.
0 times 0 equals 0.
Yes. It hasn't changed either in many, many years.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate it very much. Next item, number 2, zoning ordinance amendment. Is there any other discussion? Or could we just table this item for now until next meeting? Is that what we should do, Caitlin?
Yes.
Okay. Could I have a motion to table this item, please?
Motion that we table the zoning ordinance amendment discussion until the September meeting based upon the discussion of tonight's meeting.
Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a second from Gary.
Give it to Gary.
Gary, give it to Gary.
Give it to
Okay.
Gary, yes.
I'll take it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carried. Next item on the agenda is Planning Commission bylaws. You have in your packet, this packet gets bigger every time.
That's my bad.
Here we go. All right. Caitlin, you have some discussion for us with this?
Not with the bylaws.
Not with the bylaws. Okay.
Unless you need me to answer a question.
So the bylaws, the ones, and Kim was kind enough to put in red, I'm assuming, the language that we had in the minutes of the previous meeting.
Correct.
So if those are in agreement with our members, unless there's any other discussion.
We do because the word can. Yeah, we did a slight, at council, there was a modification of the second paragraph of Article 4 under
Okay.
membership.
All right.
It's close, but not what council thought it should be worded.
What did they want for a revision?
Oh, God.
Want me to read it?
Do you have that? Yeah, you
I
have
do.
that language.
So the
Yeah.
second paragraph in Article 4 would read, if during their term a qualified elector member of the planning commission ceases to be a qualified elector, the member shall no longer be eligible to serve for the remainder of said term.
So they want the person to leave immediately when they're no longer an elector.
Correct.
That's the difference. Okay.
It's mandatory.
It's mandatory.
Right.
You leave when you're no longer a member. Is everybody, I'm assuming council is in favor of that particular language? Yeah.
Makes
Okay.
sense.
Just a tiny bit of commentary regarding that. With regard to the paragraph up above, the first paragraph of Article 4, there was some compromise, you could call it, between my position that you should be a resident of the village to be on the planning commission, and village administration wanting to have the Michigan Planning Enabling Act play a role in this. So what that paragraph up above is doing is it's saying if we have less than 7 members, which will hopefully never happen again, then Planning Commission would have the option of appointing a party person who is not a qualified elector. Qualified elector meaning, somebody registered to vote in the village. Because the Planning Enabling Act does leave the door open to bring in a person to be a member of our planning commission who is not in our community. So for less than 7, we would have that option of appointing somebody who is not a qualified elector. So, and I suppose in a certain sense, the two of them would almost, the two paragraphs would almost seem to bump heads, but not really. The second paragraph is mandatory. The first paragraph is discretionary with planning commission. If we have less than 7 members and you want, if the planning commission was so inclined and wanted to bring somebody in who is not a qualified elector and bring them in under the Michigan Planning Enabling Act, you could do so.
Does that act say it's
Yeah.
like one person or two?
Pardon?
The act say one person only? Or is it-
Yeah, the Michigan Enabling Act would allow for 2. But remember that it's, yes, that's what the Planning Enabling Act says, but remember it's discretionary with planning commission if you
But it does
wanted to
say
do that.
taxes too, right?
Pardon?
It does say two.
Yes, yes.
Caitlin, did you have something to say?
Just wanted to clarify too that with they shall recuse, part of it too is that you could think of it as a different status. So you were a resident, and so you need to take formal action as a non-resident to be confirmed on the planning commission. So that's part of that process too. So I don't think that they'd be considered conflicting. It's just you've changed your status. And so therefore you need to go through this process if you want to be reconfirmed. So I think that they're still consistent with state statute. Not that I'm an attorney, but
Well, that's a good point.
And we had that discussion at council too.
Yeah. Mhm.
So then we're going to revise, first of all, the second paragraph and make it mandatory that the person leave. Kim, do you have the language for that revision? And then what do you want to do with the first paragraph? Is there anything you want to change with the first paragraph?
I don't believe we had
No.
any changes to
No
make. to the first
discussion on the first paragraph? Okay.
Right.
So then we will not approve this tonight until we get a revision written. Kim, can we do that for next meeting? And then we'll have the printed version and we can discuss it then and then approve them then?
Do we have to do that, Tom? Or can we just go to that?
Well, I don't know. If everybody is in agreement, I guess we could do it tonight. As long as we understand what the language is. Kim has the language. We don't have it printed in front of us if that's a critical issue.
Which I don't think it should be. I mean, we know what we're talking about.
Well, then we would have, the motion then would have to reference the fact that Kim has the revised language that goes in this particular part of the bylaws for the membership.
Kim Reed.
Or I can help with the motion if said needed.
You can help with the motion?
So you could, you would say you would recommend approval of the planning commission bylaw amendment as discussed. Because she did read it already, and specifically do that.
Does that work for everybody?
It's-
All right, give me that motion again.
So somebody would be recommending approval of the planning commission bylaws as discussed.
All right, I need a recommendation. I have a Tim, so moved. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Did I have a second?
I'll second.
Oh, Gary seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carried.
There is one other amendment, which is at the very end, page 29, Article 9 of the amendments.
Yes.
In red there. And we had addressed this at our last meeting that the bylaws of the planning commission should be submitted to council for its approval. And so that is being proposed as well.
Okay.
And that's why I recommended the motion say recommend.
We're already meeting what our
Okay.
recommendation is.
All right.
So now we'll go to council for verification.
So we don't need a motion for this one then, right?
Because that was part of the I guess I would have crafted that's still part of it because it's original corrections.
Okay, all right, part of the whole. Okay.
Okay.
All right, very good.
Excellent. Good.
All right, master plan review. All right, Smiley, you're on.
Yes.
Oh, by the way, I was very impressed with the information you gave us, and so was Glenn. Glenn was he was in awe. It looked so good.
Oh, good.
I do have questions,
Yes.
Yeah, and
Very-
ask
very
me
good,
questions
though.
as we go throughout.
Yeah,
Very, very good.
And that's something that, in anticipation of getting new membership, I'd be happy to meet with them prior to their September meeting, at least 30 minutes or so, just to catch you up to speed. You've missed a few different key pieces of the first part of the master plan, so just want to catch you up to speed on some of that. So that's something I can coordinate with village staff earlier on. And I apologize for technology. It is saying, please still wait. And so I will not be able to have my graphics and my computer in front of me, but we all have the paper copy in front of us. So as part of our master plan, our continuing discussion, the master plan is our policy guidebook. So it's trying to project anywhere from next year to the next 20 years. What do we want to be as a community and how are we going to get there? And so we're still, as part of the kind of finding out and research portion of the master plan, trying to take a snapshot of where we are today, evaluation of what are the different things we want to fix and where do we want to go. So the next meeting that we'll be having is more going to talk about our goals and objectives and our future land use plan, which is a potential future of what uses we're going to allow where. So the first piece of information that I provided is our housing study. So this is a very in-depth deep dive into our housing profile, and then has our new format with it, with the black and the orange and the A. So kind of going over some highlights specifically of the data regarding our housing. We have about 1,163 dwelling units in the village. Of that breakdown, about 79.6% are one unit structures, as opposed to when you think about the 2 to 4, 5 to 9, you're looking at like apartment buildings or duplexes or triplexes. The other big percentage is about 14%, which is our mobile home park. So from a housing perspective, we're predominantly single family homes. And looking at those single family homes and their breakdown, about 3% are one bedroom. We have 2 to 3 bedrooms that are 78%. And then of the housing stock that are 4 bedrooms or more is 18.6%. And so one of the things, if we remember back with our demographic information we talked about, the population that is still increasing in our area or projected to increase is those who are elderly. And so looking at, is there a place for them to stay? Do they want 2 to 3 bedrooms? Typically, yes or no. And those younger professionals who don't necessarily have children per se. And so do they want a housing of that caliber as well? On the next page, we talk about our age structure. And one of the great things about Elmont is that we have a really good spread across the different age demographics. And so what I provided there in the darker orange line shows the village of Elmont, where we compare to Romeo, Elmont Township, Lapeer County as a whole, Emily City, and then Michigan as a whole. So we, the least amount of housing stock that we have is 1939 or earlier, or 2000s and later. The largest housing stock we have is typically between 1980 and 1999. And so having a diversity of different housing stock provides for that you're not all needing to do investment at the exact same time. Typically, a neighborhood goes through like a 40-year life where they're newly constructed, you have some minor maintenance, then you need to have major maintenance, and usually you have a generational switch in ownership where the older individual sells their house, they don't need that much room, and you have somebody younger come in, and you just kind of see that transition over time. So that's one of the nice things about specifically our community. One of the other highlights is our minimum housing value. And so our median housing value is $174,800, which is lower than the township, which is $239,400, higher than Emily City, which is $101,000. Then you have the village of Romeo, which we are also lower than theirs, which is $203,500. And then we're just around where Lapeer County is about with $186,700. And so from like a just quick snapshot as far as median value of housing, we're kind of somewhere in the mid ground, I would say, as far as our housing pricing. One of the things that we care about a lot from a community viability standpoint is affordability of housing. And so I broke it out into 2 different categories. You're looking at those that are home ownership, which is the wide majority of our current housing stock. 90% is owner occupied, and 10% are considered rental units. And so with looking at the mortgage affordability, this green graph, it's recommended that you do not spend more than 1/3 of your income, household income, on housing expenses. Primarily the biggest expense is your mortgage. And so what it's showing with your mortgage is that 80%, a little bit over 80% of those with a mortgage are less than 30%. That's great. That means that typically people that are in a home ownership situation easily afford, but based on that metric. And then you maybe have a few that are on the cusp with 30 to 39, and then 40 or more. And the reason I can't do exactly a 33 is because that's not how the census does their data. So you got to kind of group it one way or the other. Now, if you go to a rental situation, our median rental in the village of Elmont is $886. The township has $1,800 or $1,088. Emily City is 736, so not about $50 less. And then the Village of Romeo, or no, sorry, that's the wrong math. 150, thank you. And the Village of Romeo is 832, so that's 50 less than us. And then Lapeer County as a whole is 840. So from a rental standpoint, we really are on the higher end compared to your owner-occupied house value. And when you look at the same recommendation that you have 33% of your income is going towards housing, we have a slightly different picture that's being painted. And so just under 60% are within the good threshold, less than 30%. But then we have 40% that are spending over 35% of their income on rental. And so that's a real big affordability issue for our rental situation. So those who either have a lower household income, still wanting to be in our community and not able to get, and even if they're able to be in our community, they're still going to have a long-term fiscal issue and be at a disadvantage. It depends on their agreement specifically. So one of the things to, as an asterisk for census data, is it is individually interpretation. So I, as a homeowner, get the census and I fill it out. So if I think my house is worth $1 million and I put that down, nobody's saying, no, you're wrong. You're not worth $1 million. And so that's the one caveat with some of the census data is it's self-evaluation and projected. And so I'm not entirely sure how all of those individuals would generally think of their situation, but I think it's mostly a rental situation. So that's what I would anticipate. That's probably what they put.
To that would be some parties actually own their mobile home, but still pay lot rent. So is lot rent considered rental?
And that's where the person is choosing how they fill that out. I would
Right.
say generally
Mhm.
speaking, if you own the home on it, you would probably say, I own my home and I'm paying a smaller property tax for the renting of the lot. But again, it's individually responded for that census information. So that's something that I see as something we may want to consider addressing as far as when we talk about housing and capacity, is that the affordability of renters is clearly a concern. Next page talks about the state equalization value. And so Lapeer County, as part of their equalization department, they look at this information annually. And part of this helps essentially determine local government revenue in some aspects because you're looking at the different value and get taxation off of those. And so looking at the spread of the last 3 years specifically, you have an average increase about 5%, 5.6. And so you can see last year, 2022 to 2023, you had a 12% jump in that value change, as opposed to 2021, 2022 is 0.57. And so the table below that, what that's showing is the percentage of how we competed with our neighboring jurisdictions on a value change regarding our equalization value. And so we are essentially near the bottom where the orange line again with the square. We're on the bottom side of 2021. We're at the very, very last of last year experiencing the least amount of change regarding our equalization value. And then we're second highest on the jump of 12%. And so that's something we want to monitor. Part of it is we're thinking about inflation in some aspects. The other thing to keep in mind is that our anticipated growth rate based on our population projections is about 6.4%. So one of the other things that we talked about trending wise is that though we have the same number of dwelling units, sometimes we have less people in them. And so the long-term concern is if we have a certain level of service expected, so we have so many dwelling units and we do a leaf pickup or something of that nature. Well, now that we have less people specifically providing income or things of that nature, are we going to have an increased number of population, that 8.4 that's anticipated, but then we're seeing a drop in other things. So that's something we want to continue to monitor as we see population still projected to increase. The number of people living in one unit is decreasing, and we're seeing that the different value and revenue that we can get from equalization as far as the revenue, we're seeing that kind of be a little bit all over the place as part of that. One of the things we also did as part of that is kind of tried to help structure a neighborhood component. One of the things we'll talk about next meeting when we talk about goals or things of that nature is, do you want to have clear neighborhoods defined? That's something that you know where the Kaylin subdivision is if you know you live here or you do development, but there is no welcome to the Kaylin subdivision sign. Same thing with Victoria Woods subdivision. We use some institutional knowledge to figure out, well, what's the name of that sub? It doesn't have a sign, as opposed to Orchard Hills does. And so that's something that is part of a local branding, especially as you're looking at a lot of our different historical neighborhoods near our downtown. If they had an identity, would that be something that would be of interest as part of people to rally behind? Because not all of these, especially the traditional downtowns, they don't have like a homeowners association. And I'm not familiar with the community enough to know, do you have active HOAs specifically that do different things and things of that nature? So part of this is just kind of categorizing a broad brush, generally speaking, where you have different neighborhoods that are similar. So you have your different ridge condos that look very similar as a kind of enclave of their own. You have the Kaylin subdivision, which is a mixture of different housing as it was built over several phases, which is similar to West Wind's neighborhood, also built over several different components. You have your Drakeshire's Farm subdivision, they're kind of their own little enclave. You have the downtown and then kind of your northern downtown and then your east downtown, which is different than houses that are specifically on St. Clair Street. They have a very different historical presence and different issues from a character standpoint. So just kind of generally speaking, tried to categorize these areas as we move forward in our discussion. If there's different goals for different areas, we can at least better articulate this is the neighborhood we're generally talking about. So next component, I apologize for the error specifically noted on that page. Yes, sir. Yes. That's right. So one of the things, and again, I guess I tried to do general broad brush, is as you go north on Van Dyke there, going west.
Across like from West Winds.
Oh, right. There are some different houses there. And it would, I didn't know if specifically speaking, because I kind of started off at Cherry Street and you kind of have that, they all then are really long, deep lots with specific individual homes. I didn't know if that was enough capacity you wanted to consider that a neighborhood or not. Because I could consider it similar to east on St. Clair Street. We would have a west on St. Clair Street. And that's something I could easily add, but it seemed like a really low quantity. And so I didn't know if that was ready for that neighborhood distinction.
I was just thinking that would go all the way to the village limits. That's all.
okay.
That's all.
All right.
I don't want to make anyone feel excluded. So that's one thing that I could specifically add a west on St. Clair, and that would be both sides of the road. Because we do have single family homes that are that historic, more in nature, similar to your east on St. Clair roams that are there. Great. Sure. Right, on the next page, So one of the things specifically that's important from our standpoint is what is our built out? Built out is a term that we use in planning, sometimes in other capacities, to talk about, well, what's left to develop if you wanted to develop something. And so, yes. Yes. So it happened within the document, a digital hyperlink didn't transpose for whatever reason, and so that'll be fixed. So one of the things I did as part of trying to figure out a forecast, if we were to build all the vacant land now and within the current regulation, what kind of a picture are we looking at as far as when we look at our population increase? We've had a lot of different past discussions about increasing the number of houses that we have in the village. So if we were to really paint that picture, what does that look like? And so some general assumptions I made is that our single family homes, our minimum lot size is 0.2 acres. Typically speaking, our multiple family dwelling density is about 0.4 acres, allowing for a 2-story building. And that would essentially, but the size you need to put in a multiple family development needs to be at least 0.78. So the 0.04 is the density of population, as opposed to the next bullet is how much land do I need to actually put in an apartment building? And so that's why there's 2 multiple family. One is specifically for the density of how many units, because you would have 2 different stories, versus what is the minimum I likely need to actually put in a property. So the 3 different categories I did to help digest how do we do this built out forecast is 1, greenfields. So greenfields are generally property that is not had any changes to it. And so we have a few different properties that meet that description. The most notable is probably Cherry Street at that 62 acres. And so with that, and then you have a few other at the end of Day Street. There's some vacant property that's there. And so if you add up those vacancies, you could have potentially 325 single family dwelling units. Or if you wanted to upzone that to be multiple family, having more density or anything higher than 0.2, you could go to a potential future of 1,625. So it's a big difference on how much units and population growth potentially. And what this is trying to do is to give you a range. We could do a fraction thereof or anything of that nature, but if you're talking about low end versus high end, that's the 2 numbers.
So is this making the assumption that you're using all the vacant land available in the village?
So the main areas I specifically focused on was that they were they had to be zoned accordingly. So this doesn't include your industrial park. So it had to already be considered single family residential, and then that this was specifically vacant. Because then the next category that I had was talking about infill residential. And so sometimes there's like a few little vacant lots. You luckily are one of the communities that don't have a lot of that. There are some different vacant lots that are still within the village. And so one of the things you could consider is specifically having those, instead of being single family homes, you could have those be duplexes instead, because the lot is generally established. And so within those parameters and looking at the few different sites that there were, the sizes of those 7 infill lots were anywhere between 0.19 acres to 0.46 acres. So that could be 7 to 9 single family dwelling units, or it could be 50 multiple family, depending on what you want to do. But I only found 7 that were that. And it might be easy to conceptualize. I'm not there yet in my little flipping, but I did have a map that shows this information. And so the last part, and we've previously talked about this really minorly, is talking about housing density. And one of the most easy ways in the zoning perspective you can add density is to allow for accessory dwelling units. And so what I provided in this graphic is showing what that could look like. And so accessory dwelling units mean instead of just having one single family home, now you have two, as opposed to in other arrangements where you have a granny flat or something like that, you have to be a relative to also be there. This would be a full different rental unit. And so sometimes it's in a detached building. Sometimes they convert a garage and they have that brought up to standard so someone could live in there, usually as a studio or things of that nature. Some people build up and put it above their garage as part of it. Some do it as basements, probably not as likely in Michigan, but that's something that they can do. Or they do an addition on their house and have like a separate entrance or things of that nature. So that's something we've talked about in the past is a potential easy way to increase density is to allow for that to be added. So we have a total of 862 parcels that are currently zoned residential. And so what I tried to do is in that table, and then in the map, I tried to color code specifically based on our single family residential parcels, what size are they? Because from my planning hat and knowing this community, we don't want to add that to every single lot because it may not be conducive. And so I have them based on essentially 0.1 acre increments, starting at 0.2 or less. So those are our minimum single family dwelling sizes, which are a dark blue. Then we go up to 0.3 acres. So this is about 1.5 times our minimum lot size. Then we have going up to 0.4, which is our two times our minimum lot size. And then I go to 0.5, which is 2.5 times our minimum lot size. Then I have a range of 0.5 to 1, which is pretty much our average lot of what our multiple family currently is in the village. And those are specifically in red. And then you have the orange, which is 2 times what the size is. And then you have the yellows, which are much larger specific pieces of property. And so what that map kind of helps shows is essentially we have our traditional downtown, the northern downtown area. They specifically have a lot of small lots. And so they do have a few that are somewhere between 0.3 and 0.4, so about 1.5 times the size. And then you have your some of our other traditional subdivisions that have typically larger lots specifically. And then you have, as I mentioned, there are several different sites that have really large but have one single family home on them. And so this map is to hopefully help us in the next chapter of our discussion is there a place for accessory dwelling units to add additional density? I'm not saying that we need to make a policy decision to say we're going to write this zoning ordinance to do X or Y, but I'm trying to provide information so you can help make an educated decision. What is our density? What does that look like for our different subdivisions? Other things we could talk about, not just related to accessory dwelling units, is do we want to revise our residential zoning districts? Do we think it makes sense to have multiple single-family residential districts because we're having a bunch of different variance cases because of setbacks? And rather than having these specific neighborhoods have to come in for variance, could we just put them in a different zoning district and have them play by different rules? And so that's part of that discussion too, is do we add more than just the one that we currently have to better appease what character we want in those different neighborhoods? Sorry for being so long-winded, but that's kind of what the purpose is of that. So looking to the future, we have a really low vacancy rate within the village, which is great. We have a good mixture of aging of housing. We have a gross rental of $886 with a median mortgage payment of about $1,401. Some of the things we'll talk about in a little bit is talking about our existing land use, which is that we're predominantly single-family homes. We have a low housing expectations are specifically aging, and we have a really low number of studio and one-bedroom accommodations. So there's different things we could consider regarding branding of our different neighborhoods. We could evaluate the residential zoning districts, densities, different height restrictions regarding accessory buildings, and if we want to do like a form-based code, which is essentially looking at the design of a building rather than what's in the building, regarding those different components.
Is there any questions before I move to the next chapter? All right, next chapter is much simpler. It is talking about our existing land use, so taking a snapshot of what's where, which is different than zoning. Zoning is specifically what uses you are allowed to have there. And so with the existing land use that we currently have, 44% is single family. We have 8% that are agricultural, so that's primarily our Cherry Street location, but we also do have some vacancies behind Drakeshire that account for some of that. And then we have our vacant, which is that 26%. So one of the things with this existing land use that we talked about last meeting is we didn't stay true to parcel lines. If there was a single family home in the front portion, we separated that out and said, well, there's these back part of the property that technically could be something else. It's in private property rights. They can keep it as long as they want. But if we're looking at our built out future, there is more potential increase in dwelling units or density if that were to change over or you had different zoning or something of that nature. And so that's what that map's kind of showing. Specifically, a lot of our vacancies are in our industrial park and things of that nature. And so I kind of describe each of the different classifications in comparison to our 2012, which was the last time we did an existing land use update. We don't have necessarily a whole lot of change. We do have some additional residential development. So Drakeshire, a few different specs were put in there, but it was primarily vacant. Now we can say it's primarily occupied, which is a great situation for us. There's a little bit more commercial over by Vickyards. We have the A&W that got put in there. That's not accounted for in this 2012 evaluation. And we're just continuing to move forward with that. The other big notable change is the school. So the elementary school was public. Part of it's now a assisted dwelling facility, has some recreation that's there, things of that nature. So looking into the future, we have a lot of different potential capacity. So a lot of single family, there's definitely some vacancy or underutilized property that we could add something to. We anticipate based on your percentages of land use that you may have more flexibility or need for multiple family or alternatives to single family, more in commercial or more industrial, which we have zoned accordingly for commercial and industrial. It's just a matter of when they come knocking. Any questions before I move to the next section? All right. Next section is talking about our thoroughfare plan. So going through it really quickly, you can see in the orange box that Van Dyke being our major thoroughfare, we have about 18,161 average drivers. It's a monsoon.
Yeah, it is a monsoon.
Talk slower.
Yeah, I'll try to talk louder.
And then St. Clair Street being our other major thoroughfare, that has 4,281 daily drivers. And so still a pretty significant amount of traffic that's located on that thoroughfare.
That's sort of a current average, that 18,000? Is that pretty current information?
Yes.
Because I know a while back, before, quite a few years back, at that time, the village was averaging over 20,000 vehicles were going through here every day.
And so it depends too. So if you look at, I don't think I showed it here. But one of the things you can do is that on the state's portal, looking at traffic counts, the number changes as you approach the village.
It does.
So the portion of Van Dyke in the village is actually, it depends on if you're north side of the village or south side of the village, but the number changes.
No kidding.
And so farther up on Van Dyke, there are more there's more traffic, probably around your 20,000 or whatnot. Now, the thing to keep in mind is that these are based on different
points in time sometimes, and then they average them together. So the specific data I talked about from Van Dyke is actual counts from 2022. So you, as opposed to some of the other data along Van Dyke that was talked about being that 20,000, they're from different years. And so that can play into that number changing. But it is different. So one of the things on the next page that is a intentional placeholder is I only wanted to provide the most current and recent data is our PACER rankings. And so we're anticipating on getting that in the fall. So I didn't want to write it on previous year's PACERs if we're just about to get it. PACER is essentially a way of ranking the quality of our roads. I think we're all anticipating on getting similar feedback that we could do some work there. And so it's broken into 3 different categories regarding good, fair, and poor. And that's something that we're going to provide that map. And as soon as that gets figured out in the fall, bring that back to you and go over that more in detail.
That particular point, we actually completed that project Tuesday of this week. And we had the Lapeer County Road Commission engineer come out and help us rate our roads. And we were able to acquire software from Michigan Tech University that partners with them called RoadSoft. And we can actually supply the map that shows good, fair, and poor already established. So we can submit that to you.
Fantastic.
Interesting.
And so one of the other things that we brought into this plan is talking about Lapeer County. They do provide some alternative means of transportation regarding driving specifically seniors to different services. And so wanted to acknowledge that if you're 60 years or older, that is an available means of transportation for you. And then the other big part is talking about our non-motorized transportation system. And so some of the main 4 things that as we were evaluating the system that we saw issues with is we have some sidewalks to nowhere pictured there. We noticed some of the different sidewalks to nowhere sometimes just stopped, and then other times actually had obstacles in the way. So there, in this example, there's actually specifically trees in which development over time, the trees were probably there, the sidewalks weren't required, and other times, as part of this body, we've waived them so they didn't have to put in sidewalks. There's some disconnection of intersections throughout the entire village as well. And so what I pictured is this is over by our Stone Ridge. And so the condominium sidewalks come out and go towards the street. And then you have Kidder Roads go straight here. So you probably have a 20-foot change and they don't connect. And there's no good reason why, in a very polite way of putting it. From a developmental standpoint. So somebody then as a user has to enter the roadway, which is a more hazard, and then go to Kidder Road and then back on the safety of a sidewalk. So that happened throughout many of our different neighborhoods. We have different sidewalks that are right on the edge of the road. This is more characteristic of closer to our downtown area. And so it's right off the road. Great reasons why that works is it's easy road snow clearage because it's right next to the road. Sometimes it can be seen as an easier development because you're not building up a sidewalk or something like that 5 feet off and having some green space in between. However, there is the potential for more collision of pedestrians. I didn't specifically find a picture of the village when I was walking around, but sometimes that's used as an extended parking space rather than a sidewalk. Because there is no barrier between those two. And then there were a few different spots where there's some different maintenance or obstacles in which specifically one area there was a very aggressive daylily patch. And so it pretty much took over the whole sidewalk. And so different things like that. One of the other things that I didn't list as part of that major 4, but was an observation is their downtown crossing. And that's something that they've worked really hard, and I'll mention it later as well, is in Oxford specifically, they had this same issue. You have one space in the whole downtown to walk safely across the street. and that's near the center or on the upper end. And so that makes it a little bit more inconvenient for shoppers to do multiple different stops within your downtown because they have to go up to one central point again to go back and forth. And so the map that I provided is looking at our non-motorized inventory. And so the yellow areas are where there's an existing sidewalk that we were able to identify. And that includes our trail that goes from our village park over to Kidder Road. And so that's that yellow line. The existing crosswalk is like a blue harder core dash line, and that's important because sometimes with different, even in a residential setting, if there's no clear way to cross the street, it could be a potential conflict with a specific user if it's not otherwise dedicated. And then the dashed gray lines would appear to be where a really good future pathway could potentially be. So specifically, if you go to the school loop, if you're going from the middle school and then you have to go along their service drive road, and then you go in that loop, there's a gap between there and the elementary school. Unless you were to go through their parking lot, then you got a connection. And so that's one of those things that trying to think holistically from a network, how do you make it so it's really easy for a user to say, this is how I walk this way? Some of the things I also identified is in those red circles are crossing improvements. So this would include your disconnected intersections where, like I mentioned earlier, where you have a sidewalk and then it ends before you hit to the other sidewalk. So there's a variety of those indicated as part of this report. Specifically looking at our downtown, which is easier to see on the following page because I blew it up to focus on our downtown. Some different components as part of our recommendations is one, to add some additional crossing, not only along Van Dyke, but also along St. Clair Street. So if I wanted to walk down the residential street to the library and I happened to be on the gas station corner and didn't cross closer to Van Dyke, well, now how do I get across the street from a clear way? And so that's one of the things that we recommend evaluating. That's something that may be a potential need is if you're doing that. Same thing with North and South St. Clair. If you go east of Van Dyke, if you're parked in the southern lot, is there an easy way to get to the northern or vice versa? And you have to go back to that main intersection. And then there's a potential for a few different other walkable areas south of St. Clair Street and then north of St. Clair Street. That, again, something that could have further review and figuring out what the best mechanism is. The other asterisk is MDOT. This is their roadway as far as that's concerned. Looking at that recommendation, though, this is a picture on the next page of a pedestrian island that's put in. So this is something that's in their downtown, and this is how they were able to address not putting a light or something else that would slow the traffic numbers, but made it easier for someone to pass 2 lanes of traffic. In our situation would be 1. You'd be on an island, and then you'd proceed when the other side is done. And so that's something that's an MDOT corridor. They were able to find a solution. We should try to find a solution as well.
Beginning to see more and more of those.
Yes, you are. And MDOT is open to understanding that there are more than just cars to worry about.
Communities that you drive through, they're beginning to be very popular.
Yes.
And, you know, you can get a violation if you run the darn thing. You're supposed to stop when there's pedestrian traffic, and if you don't, you're in trouble if you get caught. But yeah, it's the communities are going in that direction.
So some of the other recommendations that I mentioned is being aware of ADA compliance and things of that nature when thinking about our different sidewalks. If there's anywhere we can make it easier for those with disabilities to be able to use our network. If we can fill in our gap of our missing sidewalk network, if we can complete loops or streets. Specifically in my dashed versus not dashed, I tried to have it at least on one side of the road. Some of the other, I guess when you're looking at our different neighborhoods, sometimes there is not a really good option to be north, but at least you could walk on the south side because of either existing features that are there
specifically present.
David, you indicated a couple of meetings ago that we think we're fortunate enough to get funding to redo St. Clair from one border to the other, is my understanding.
Yes,
Will that include sidewalks or will it just be the road?
it's just the road and the infrastructure under the road.
Infrastructure under the road, okay. Okay.
Some of the other components of the recommendation are including requiring sidewalks for all new developments or building projects, working with MDOT to secure different sidewalks north of Van Dyke, specifically to connect those different commercial corridors. We could consider doing something like bike lanes or things of that nature when the time arises. And then in our downtown, looking at adding additional pedestrian crossings. Consider adding pedestrian crossings or a safe way to walk in our parking lot areas. So behind routes, if you're in that parking lot, is there a safe way to go from the south side to the north side? As long as you turn your head back and forth to watch for them. And so different things like that again, this is a future document thinking into the 20-year future. What are things that we may, if we had the opportunity arise, could we potentially change? Looking at our different connections, specifically from the downtown to the village park, making that an easier connection to our trail that goes through that natural space. And then with sidewalks, looking at a minimum of 5 feet. A lot of ours are currently 3. And so a little bit more space. So if you have your baby carriage and someone's walking by, at least you could have both still remain on the sidewalk walking by each other. Are there any questions before I change gears to the next chapter? Okay, next one is talking about utility. We have our own water system where we utilize the Great Lakes Water Authority regarding specifically that. There's been a lot of different investment we've done over the years. In 2008, I believe, was the last notable. One of our nice features of our community is a gateway entrance is our water tower as part of our specific assets within the community. That helps with us with affordability of water rates because we can tap from the main line when rates are low and then drain from the water tower prior to going straight to the main line.
2012-ish, we built the new water pump station also, which would be an asset.
Okay, I was not aware of that. 2012, the pump station.
2014.
14. Okay. I will add that. Thank you. And so what I provided then is a map kind of generally showing where those water lines are. One of the things, I guess while we're looking at the map, as part of our recommendations as well, is that you want to make sure as best you can you have loops. Stagnant water isn't a great thing. And so that's something that as we go through neighborhoods or finding different connections, one of the things when they were doing the next phase of the K-Lynn subdivision, we wanted them to connect to Drakeshire to have a more consistent flow in that dead end. As long as it keeps moving, you're less likely to have different issue or flow issues. And so the best we can, we're going to try to make sure that we connect and complete loops from our capacity standpoint. The next is talking about, I guess the other notable component specifically of water is that we typically per day are about 700 or 470,000 gallons per day is our typical water usage for the village. Next is talking about our sanitary system. So again, I provided that general map specifically for that.
Back up for 1 second.
Sure.
So is that maximum capacity, the 470?
That's not capacity. That's what we usually use.
That's what we use.
That's my understanding.
Okay, do we have any idea what's available to the village?
As long as we're willing to pay for it, as much as we want.
I'm just curious. If let's say we started a development and they wanted water. The question is, do we have limitless water or do we get to a point where we can't provide any more water?
Sure. So the technical engineering hat that I'll put on is it really depends where you are and the line that you wish to connect to service it. So the reason I answered that way is if you have a line that's an 8-inch or a 12-inch main, you have more water capacity that you can extend the system and keep going. If you're closer to a 4-inch, that is not something you necessarily want to tap in and put another 100 homes on because it doesn't have the same level of pressure or volume to keep up with that demand.
Right.
So that's part of specifically, I didn't specifically go into detail on the sizes per
It's okay.
different
No,
lines,
that's
but
fine.
that's kind of answering your
But
question.
I-
Really is site
Curiosity,
dependent.
you know, because we're talking about the possibility of doing, you know, being able to do developments. And if you do developments, people would like water and sewer, if that's possible. So the question is, do we have the capacity to add additional people onto the water system? That's
But we don't have it on the sanitary.
right. I understand that.
Right, that's part
We
of
have
that.
water, but not the sanitary.
Luckily, though, we do have a pretty extensive water network.
Mhm.
So there is some level of, I would say, easy connectivity. The issue really for water is, do we have enough size of that local pipe to service what you want?
Okay.
And it really depends where you are in the village.
Caitlin, we might need to double check some of the numbers that you've shared.
Got it.
Because our 470,000 is our max capacity at the wastewater treatment plant. And based on how much water we're being charged by GLWA, like for last month, I think we had 5.5 million gallons that went through the system. And so just trying to do some quick math without my calculator doing the long division, it's less than 200,000 gallons a day. And our average flow that comes into the wastewater treatment plant on a normal dry month, like let's say June, is about 210 to 220,000 gallons a day. So
It's about half the capacity.
as we
Give or take,
address infill and infiltration issues, especially after a heavier rain like we just had, if this went on for a few days in a row,
You're going to fill up tonight.
we're
yeah.
gonna we might, and we're actually monitoring that.
Yeah.
We kind of know now if we have an inch of rain, how much more additional water will get into the system just through infiltration. But anyway, we can share those numbers and make
Nope,
sure
and you're
that-
right. I was quickly glancing through my notes, and that is the capacity for sanitary. That's not our gallons per day
Right.
specific
David,
raw.
as far as you know, do we still have residences that their water runoff, not sewer water, but water runoff is going into the sewer system in the village?
Potentially, people that have hooked up their gutters and going into the sanitary.
Gutters and downspouts and
Yeah.
stuff like that?
So that's
So
still,
we still have those that are draining into the sewer system?
there are some, I'm sure, yes.
Okay.
No problem. And that's one of those things with our storm and sanitary is that it is part of that combined system. And so one of the things that's still advertised on the website is voluntary disconnection and awareness for residential downspouts to be disconnected to decrease our flow.
I read that. That's why I asked that question, because, I was curious.
So as far as looking at our system, then some of our different recommendations is continuation of our capital improvement plan. So that's trying to project into the future 6 years. What are the different major capital improvements we need to make, and do we have a plan to achieve that fiscally and help do those? So that's done every year. Looking at storage. So from a water capacity standpoint, we do have the water tower that does storage, but having another storage location to help with that, how much our average draw is, could also make us a little bit better of a network and keep us, in the case of an emergency, in a better situation. Looking at our water distribution, as I mentioned, looking at our sizing of our different lines throughout the village, if we can get rid of dead ends, and then there is different lingering concerns regarding the wastewater treatment plant. So engineering-wise, Wade Trim's still getting a little bit more familiar with our system, and so we're hoping to eventually be able to have some level of forecasting. But at this time, I don't have I don't want to give you a fool's errand number. I want to get you a legitimate number, if we can have a range or something of that nature. So looking into the future, as we continue to look at our system, it's not necessarily just growth we're worried about, it's also maintenance of our existing facility. And so if we're looking at, again, looking at the different users and things of that nature, different things that easily is how you add property to a jurisdiction is either through annexation or 425. The easiest way to do growth is you expand your boundaries. So I simply just defined what those were. Specifically, there's some different nuances. So annexation is the complete transfer of one property to the other jurisdiction, as opposed to 425 is an agreement between two jurisdictions. And those can vary greatly depending upon what they want to include in those, how much property, what other facets and things of that nature are included. But that's something that if we were looking at a growth boundary, those would be terms that would be used.
Quite a number of years ago, before your time,
Yes.
I think. Yeah, it only took 2.5 years to get an agreement with the township to do 425. And the saying goes that the word annexation is a poison pill. Yeah, whatever the other governmental unit you're dealing with, because again, going back a number of years, there was consideration of the village becoming a city, which would give us autonomy from the township, and it was vigorously and vehemently opposed because if we were a city, we could just annex. We don't need your permission, we just take. And so that went, it was on the ballot, and yeah. So yeah, we have dealt with that in the past, and it's a very interesting topic, but it's a tough one to deal with.
And so
Politically.
yes. And so one of the things from other sections we talked about is the number of dwelling units is that 1,163. And then based on the DDA's website, we have about 59 different businesses within our jurisdiction. So that's something that when we're looking at our users, that's kind of some numbers to keep in mind. And with that, that is my full analysis.
That's your analysis.
And so
Very good.
Yeah.
That is very impressive information.
Yeah.
And the graphs and charts are very illustrative. They help out quite a bit.
okay.
Great job.
Now, where do we go for next meeting then?
So next meeting, we're going to be talking about our goals and objectives and talking a little bit about our future land use plan. And so that's something that will, since now this concludes essentially our data dump as far as taking a snapshot of where we are. I will have some updated information on our community survey, what the polls say so far. So we did launch that. It's on the website. The flyer is fixed
has
with
there
the
been-
one minor typo I'm super embarrassed about.
Has there been responses from the survey?
I have not checked it because we launched it more or less yesterday. But I will give periodic updates as it was mentioned on those flyers. So hopefully you'll see those amounts to community and then encourage your neighbors to do it if you have them to do that. It
25th.
closes on September 25th. So one of our intentional goals is to also reach out to the school district. As we talked about, one of the things we added that's going to pop up is if you're under the age of 20, it pops up and talks a little bit more about, well, what makes you want to come back to our community?
Right.
That's something that is a national trend that they say the next generation beyond Z, whatever letter they are now, or alpha or mega, I don't remember. But what they're seeing is they want the big city. They want the Grand Rapids. They want to be in those areas. And I think part of it is it depends where you're collecting data from. And I think part of it is what is it about our communities that people aren't coming back? So we noticed in our demographic trends, people of my age demographic aren't going necessarily into the country. Why is that? Or why are the people that are here, why are they going to come back? And sometimes it's, I just want a little bit more fun. I want to have a few more things or a few more bars that I can jump to. And if that's something we can plan for, at least then we know the answer to that question. We can make a choice. Do we cater to that, or do we say, no, we really want this level of feel? Are there different tweaks that we can consider that would make it more likely for somebody that grew up here to come back? And so that's one of that is more of that data collected. And then also we'll have some different topics regarding our slogan campaign. So that's one of those questions we added. And so I'll at least give an update on some of those different information.
Any questions from any of the members?
Very good.
No? Thank you, Caitlin.
Welcome.
Appreciate it very much. Last item on the agenda, David, you're on Burley Park.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to broach this topic with you gentlemen to just gain some feedback. I was brainstorming with some of the staff folks over the last couple of days and had a few minutes before the meeting to review it with Caitlin. Just as some background on some improvements that were done earlier this year, in case you didn't notice it yourself. But just before Memorial Day, we spent a huge amount of money, $295, to do some brush up, some touch up of Burley Park. We were able to have our DPW crew go in and cut down the big trees that were essentially blocking the flagpole so that you couldn't see the flag when they went through the ceremonial process of bringing it down to half mast. We got rid of the overgrown shrubs and things of that nature, put in some flowers and some hardscape, and really kind of dressed it up. And the response that we received even from our veteran friends was that, hey, it looks great. In fact, Dick Bowman said, I thought I was in a different town when I drove by after it was done. So, but you know, going forward, we'd like to continue to do some improvements to the park. And one of those improvements is kind of tied in with the future events that we have in our downtown, especially with Heritage Day coming up. If you have not heard, M53 is going to be closed down for a good portion of the day. And so there's going to be all kinds of events with the car show getting bigger. There's events scheduled at the library. I've given tentative approval to the DDA director to be able to use the north part of that property, Burley Park, for a bounce house. You know, away from the memorial part, but you know, where it's actually on the parcel of property near the sidewalk. And one of the visions that I have for that property is to try to provide some additional parking space. And so in order to accomplish that, the hedgerow of boxwoods that have been there for years that have weeds and you know, other paraphernalia growing up through the greenery actually needs to be pulled out and redone. And what I envision is that if you were going south on Branch Street off of East St. Clair, off of West St. Clair, is that we would be able to put in anywhere from 7 to 9 angled parking spaces once that hedgerow is removed. And that would provide parking for people that come to the Memorial Day events there. It would provide easy access for people to get to the businesses at M53. It would help, right now, a lot of the employees that work in the stores there are parking on West St. Clair because we created parking spaces for them so that there was more parking for their customers to park in the municipal lot. And so, and we're also going to be having some discussion with a business owner that has the parcel just south of the Burley Park as well for, you know, so possibly some additional municipal parking down the road. And so, you know, parking is at a minimum on the west side of M53 compared to what we have available on the east side. And so in reviewing our zoning ordinance, any type of parking lot expansion, which this would be, requires a review by you folks. And so I just wanted to get a pulse of how you feel about doing something of that nature that for years has been kind of we can't do anything with this because the property was donated to the village, not to be used for commercial use. But in one sense, as let's say time and attitudes have changed, I think there's a win-win situation where, if we're going to make the investment in sprucing up the park and make it more open for those ceremonial events, let's provide a little bit of parking space for those attendees and even day-to-day business opportunities as people visit our downtown district. And so I wanted to, Caitlin advised me that, if we're going to do some sort of parking improvements, that it has to be paved. We just can't gravel it just to try to reduce cost to begin with. But she also had a very good brainstorm. I thought that even for Heritage Day, that we could paint some lines there and reserve it for vendors, like the people that are going to have the petting zoo at the library. They need to park their trailers and trucks somewhere. So that might be a nice spot for, reserving it for them to be able to utilize that area. So initially, it's something that we might be able to improvise and provide some vendor parking for Heritage Day. And then going forward, do the a full-scale implementation of a parking lot improvement that would be paved. That may not happen until next spring, but that's kind of the vision that I wanted to share with you folks and see if we would get your blessing to try to move forward in something like that.
What's the general feeling of that? Parking is really needed back there.
Talked about it before, but I do want to protect the spirit of what the park was. And I understand what you're saying, but it's the Veterans Park. And when I think Steve might remember this, when Sarah was here, we had plans to put some stuff in there, and it was pretty much a fire cry of that. It's almost like sacred land, and that's why it was donated. So I'm not opposed to it, but it is the Veterans Park.
If we were to go forward, or, for you to draw something up, would it be advisable that when we review it, we invite the veterans to come to the meeting and take a look at it?
Yes,
Wouldn't that
Absolutely.
be a good idea?
I agree.
I think it's a viable thought that the restrictions as to use, I think, would not be violated in following that proposal. I don't know that it would be really stepping on any toes, so to speak, if we were to do that, because I don't think it would be an infringement.
No, I agreed. I just want to be careful because
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
when we first started talking about West Side Park, and the business owners wanted to take the entire park out and make it a parking lot. And there's a very delicate balance about having more parking and keeping the integrity of the park in the town. Caitlin.
Yes, Caitlin.
So one of the
You're
wonderful
still here?
things.
Oh,
I am,
okay.
I am,
All
I
right.
am. One of the wonderful things about our master plan update that I didn't jog earlier, but one of the things we have upcoming is our open house. And so one of the things that I'll be teasing out of you during our goals and objective decisions are what are different topics that we think would be really easy to diagram, want input, want help prioritizing. This just sounds like a wonderful mapping opportunity.
Yes, doesn't it?
And
Mhm.
so keep those top of mind. We'll talk about it more next meeting, but that's something
Okay.
that we could clearly ask and say, clear poll. Do you think this is a good idea? And that's something that we could sink our
Yeah.
teeth into.
David, I think to answer your question, I said, we're not opposed. We just don't want to leave out the veterans, and we don't want to step on their toes.
Flexibility that gives us more freedom to actually implement some parking along that side of Branch Street. So,
Yep.
so that's something that we'll have to get out the map and the measuring tape and see where the boundary line is for the right of way in that
I don't think this group's opposed to exploring the possibility and see what we can come up with. Not
Yeah,
at all.
and in the short term, and not that, we're going to pull out the hedges, tomorrow, but, we could actually do parallel parking along Brand Street for the vendors, for Heritage Day, as I think a happy compromise, where maybe 5 or 6 vehicles could park along there. So, but yeah, I appreciate the feedback, and we'll do the research and at the appropriate time, come back and review it with you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we're finally done. Oh, here she
I
comes.
know, I want to make sure the
I
rain's
spoke
done.
too soon.
I want to make sure the rain's done outside. So one of the things I want to make sure, I don't know how many people are familiar with QR codes. It's as simple as take your cell phone in camera mode, go up to it, and a URL link will pop up. Click it and take it. And it'll go through the survey, and you can do it with your mobile device. And I do encourage all of our members on the Planning Commission, take the survey. You are part of your community, and though you have a bigger, it's also important to have your input in this format as well. So I do hope that you do take the survey, encourage others to do it too.
Can we have these like in businesses?
Absolutely.
From at the gas station?
Yep, I can send some with Kevin's here on Tuesday or on Monday. Monday. What time?
10 o'clock, 11 o'clock.
Okay, I'll check. Kevin's the engineer. I want to see if he is coming to the Flint office, and I could print him flyers and go, haha. And so I will see if we can do that. If not, the village, I'm sure, can print off some. And there's several of our downtown businesses like the pizzeria that, hey, could you put this on the table? And I could just do that. So, yep, spread the word. We'd love to hear people's opinion. As I mentioned, in the first part of that survey, you answer if you're a village resident, if you're in the township, and things of that nature, business owners and things too. So we do encourage everyone to participate, and we can query those out if we're interested to see if that shifts differently based on who responded to that poll.
Yeah.
David, do you have anything else for us this evening?
Just a reminder of the flyer I placed on your desk
Mhm.
before the meeting. I know you gentlemen are seasoned vets, but also for the benefit of our new soon-to-be appointees, that there's an upcoming educational opportunity that MSU Extension is doing in Lapeer County. It's a 6-week program, so it would take some dedication to commit to it. It's a $250 registration fee. We do have funds available in our budget for training purposes for you folks, and the PAR plan would reimburse us for most of the costs for this type of training. So if it's something that's of interest to you and Wednesday evenings are good on your schedule and you want to take advantage of this 6-week program that'll be held in Imlay City, please let us know and we'll help you get registered. So.
Very good. Thank you very much. Does anybody else have anything? Kim, do you have anything for us?
Sure.
Nothing? Can I entertain a motion?
I
You have something?
Yeah, one thing.
Yes.
So when I went home a couple of months ago with the master plan and the pirate ship was on the cover, my wife cringed. She's a graphic artist. Caitlin, if you want to hold those up, she submitted examples of something that she thought would be well for our community. She's like, we're doing the A again. Everybody does the A, and she thinks we stomp on the bedroom community thing too much, and we should embrace it because it has a double meaning. It's like we're coming back home, and it's like we are a home. So, that's her vision of our slogan. So, I just wanted to publicly.
Very good. Anything else from anybody? Oh, there it is.
Yep.
Very good. If there's nothing else, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I have a motion and I have a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carried. We are done.
Called it within